High above the world, where the air grows thin and the wind carries the scent of ancient stone, Elias stood at the edge of existence. The cliff dropped away into a bottomless shadow, a jagged silhouette against a sky so crowded with stars it felt heavy. To any other observer, the sight was a masterpiece of celestial light, a glittering tapestry of nebulae and constellations. But to Elias, the former scientist who had spent decades measuring the immeasurable, those lights were merely cold, burning spheres of gas, indifferent and silent. He felt the crushing weight of his own insignificance, a tiny, fragile speck of carbon clinging to a spinning rock in a vacuum that did not care if he lived or died. Elias had once been a man of answers. He understood gravity and the chemical composition of the stars, but those equations failed him when the world he loved shattered. A tragic accident, a loss of brakes on a rain-slicked road, and his wife and daughter were gone, leaving him behind to wander the ruins of a life that no longer made sense. He abandoned his laboratories, trading precision for the chaos of the wilderness. In his mind, humanity was a cosmic fluke, a brief flicker of consciousness in a universe that was vast, dark, and empty. We are but dust in the wind, and even the dust eventually disappears. He looked up, his eyes watering from the biting cold. The moon, a pale and silent sentinel, cast a silver glow over the desolate landscape. It was the work of fingers he no longer believed in, a celestial body orbiting a world filled with pain. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shivering frame, feeling the contrast between the eternal, rhythmic dance of the planets and his own decaying mortal body. The heavens were grand, ancient, and terrifyingly distant. "What is man?" Elias whispered, his voice cracking and disappearing into the roar of the wind. "What is man that you are mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you care for him?" The ancient words of the psalm felt like a mockery here. He looked at the galaxies, trillions of stars stretching into an infinity that his human mind could barely grasp. From this perspective, his grief was microscopic, his anger invisible. If there was a creator, why would such a being even notice a broken man standing on a lonely cliff? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. He turned away from the edge, retreating toward the flickering warmth of a dying campfire near his tent. His hands, calloused and dirty, reached into his pack and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. It had belonged to his daughter. Tonight, the silence of the stars was too much to bear. He opened a page at random. There, in her messy, childlike handwriting, were those same words he had just whispered. She had transcribed the first verses of the psalm with a sense of wonder. She saw the stars not as cold gas, but as the work of your fingers. She had seen beauty where he now saw only dead physics. A surge of raw pain erupted from deep within his chest. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a furious demand for recognition. Elias stood up, the journal clutched in his hand, and turned his face back to the vault of the heavens. He began to scream, a ragged, desperate sound that tore through the night air. He demanded to know why a majestic lord would care about a broken, hollowed-out man like him. Why create such beauty only to let it be destroyed by a moment of bad timing on a highway? He screamed until his throat burned and his lungs ached, challenging the silence to break. Then, as his voice died away, an unnatural heavy silence fell over the mountain, a silence so thick it felt like a presence. The silence that followed Elias's desperate scream was thick, like the air before a lightning strike. He stood there, chest heaving, waiting for an answer he expected to be as cold and indifferent as the distant stars. When none came, he slumped back toward the embers of his campfire, his daughter's journal clutched tightly in his hand. He looked at her handwriting again. She wrote how God ordained strength through the mouths of infants. To Elias, a former scientist, strength was measured in energy and force. He viewed her innocence as something fragile to be protected by his superior knowledge. Now, in the chilling quiet, he realized her innocence was a power he couldn't replicate. She didn't need to understand complex physics to feel warmth. Her strength was her inherent trust in a world he had spent his life trying to dissect. He felt a bitter pang regarding the dominion mentioned in the psalm. For years, Elias interpreted dominion as mastery through understanding. He was a man who decoded elements, thinking he achieved dominion by being smarter than the chaos. Yet, that dominion became a fortress of intellect that distanced him from the Creator. He used his career to build a world where he was the authority, only to find himself alone in the wreckage of that pride. He wasn't a steward. He was an observer who had forgotten how to participate in the life he once analyzed. The rustle of dry brush snapped him out of his thoughts. Elias reached for his flashlight, its beam cutting the darkness. Near a cluster of rocks, he saw reflecting eyes. It was a fox, one of the beasts of the field. The creature was pinned beneath a heavy branch, its leg caught at an awkward angle. Its breath came in short gasps, eyes wide with a terror Elias recognized. It was the look of a being caught in a world it could no longer navigate, waiting for the end. Without thinking, Elias moved toward the animal. His scientific mind noted the danger, but a deeper instinct took over. He knelt in the dirt, knees grinding into gravel, and spoke in low tones. He used a branch as a lever, slowly lifting the weight. As he worked, he felt a forgotten sensation, a flicker of compassion that bypassed his grief. When the branch shifted, the fox didn't run. It lay there, looking up at him, a tiny, wounded life in his hands. Elias pulled out a cloth and water. He moved with a gentleness he hadn't felt in years, cleaning the wound. Looking at the shivering creature, a realization bloomed. If he, a broken man who believed life was a cosmic accident, could feel responsibility for this small animal, what did that say about the architect of the stars? If he wasn't indifferent to the suffering of a beast, why would a God of majesty be indifferent to him? The theological paradox of the psalm swirled. You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings, the text claimed. To Elias, that seemed impossible. He felt lower than the dust. Yet, the psalm insisted humans were crowned with glory and honor. He looked at his hands, stained with dirt and blood, and wondered if dignity wasn't something to be earned through success, but something bestowed from the beginning. The air grew still. Elias sat back, the fox resting in the shadows. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel like screaming. He felt a desperate need to connect. He closed his eyes, his head bowing as if under weight. "If you are there," he whispered, "if I am remembered." A violent crack of thunder shook the ground beneath his feet, echoing like cannon fire through the valley. The sky vanished behind a wall of thick, roiling clouds. A fierce storm was breaking with speed. Heavy drops of icy rain began to fall, turning the dry dust into mud as Elias looked up into the darkness. His newfound, fragile sense of worth was about to be tested by the raw power of the heavens. The sky was no longer a silent void. It had become a roaring theater of power. Lightning fractured the darkness, illuminating the jagged peaks in brilliant, strobe-like silver flashes. Elias stood his ground as the wind whipped his hair and the rain hammered against his skin. Usually, he would have hidden from the overwhelming force of nature. But tonight was different. The fear that had paralyzed him for months, the nihilism that made him feel like dust, began to evaporate in the heat of the storm's majesty. He wasn't just a biological accident caught in a gale. He was a witness. He looked up, his eyes stinging from rain, and felt a strange, solid weight settle in his chest. It wasn't the weight of grief, but the weight of presence. The thunder vibrated through his very bones, a resonant hum that synced with his heart. The psalm echoed in his mind, no longer as a list of questions, but as a declaration of status. You have crowned him with glory and honor. As a scientist, he had always looked for worth in measurable things, achievements, intelligence, the complexity of his own DNA. He had felt small because the universe was big. But in the heart of this tempest, he understood the divine paradox. His value was not a calculation based on scale. It was a gift bestowed by the one who wove the stars. He was a creature designed to participate in the conversation of creation. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had tended to the wounded fox, and realized they were instruments of a dominion of stewardship and love. He was the bridge between the dirt of the earth and the glory of the heavens. As the first grey light of dawn began to bleed through the retreating clouds, the storm softened into a gentle drizzle. The world smelled of ozone and wet earth, a fragrance of rebirth. Elias packed his campsite in peace. He looked once more at the fox, which had survived the night and was now limping cautiously toward the safety of the brush. He saw the birds of the heavens beginning their morning song and the insects stirring in the damp grass. They were no longer random to him. They were the works of the Creator's fingers, and he was their kin, the only one among them capable of articulating the beauty of the design. He recognized his place among the beasts of the field and the fish of the sea. He descended the mountain, the descent feeling lighter than the climb. The path led him back to the civilization he had tried to flee, back to the memories he had buried. His first stop was the quiet, grassy hill where his daughter lay. For the first time, he didn't approach the headstone as a man defeated by death. He knelt, placing his hand on the stone, and opened her journal to the final page. The grief was still there, but it was no longer a poison. It was a testament to the love that had been given to him. He realized that God hadn't just remembered the stars. He had remembered Elias in his darkest hour. He had sent a wounded creature and a child's handwritten notes to bridge the gap between the infinite and the intimate. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. The words left his lips as a soft prayer, a bridge to the vast expanse above. The sun broke over the horizon, a golden orb that set the world on fire. In that moment, Elias saw the sunrise not as a routine celestial event, but as a signature. He was no longer a man crushed by the heavens. He was a man crowned by them. He stood up, turning his face toward the warmth, ready to return to a world he once thought was empty. He walked away from the grave into a future where every breath was worship. He was a masterpiece of life, remembered and loved by the master of the stars. He was a crowned creation, finally at peace with the majesty of his maker.